Great. So hopefully we're live now. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in today. My name is Larnicus. I'm from Sound of Music and the Sampler. And today we have Sarah Nicolls, pianist, composer, performer, everything really, who's put together this wonderful piece and tour called 12 Years that we're going to be hearing a bit more about later today. You can find more information about the tour on sounduk.net. There's a list of all of the upcoming dates. There's a range of public live streams and live streams from hosted by different venues, which are followed by Q&A discussions or panel discussions with climate experts. And here we have a space where we're hoping to just dig a little bit into what this piece is about and make some sense of it and of Sarah Nicolls and how she approaches this piece. So welcome, Sarah.
Of Sarah Nicolls, that's our project. Thank you for having me. Hello.
Yeah, so could you tell us a bit more about that tour was originally scheduled for last spring, and of course due to COVID was postponed, and we're very lucky that it was postponed and not cancelled, because it looks like a very exciting and interesting and very relevant piece of work. So could you tell us a bit more about what will audiences hear and experience if they tune in over the next few weeks?
So the first and most obvious thing to say is the instrument that I'm playing is the instrument which is sitting behind me, which is the only piano like it in the world. There's some sort of historical precedence with cabinet pianos, but basically this piano, I can hear your water being poured. That's really funny. That wasn't the piano. That's you drinking. So I basically designed this piano so that I could play on the strings directly, more easily. Most grand pianos, the strings are horizontal, and so they're going away from the performer. And on an upright piano, the strings go down to the ground. Normally, it's not a problem because you're just playing the keys. But for about 100 years, people have been playing inside on the strings. Lots of people from the Sound of Music will be totally familiar with watching pianists go inside a grand piano and sort of pluck around and make interesting sounds, but you can't really see what's going on, and also it's just uncomfortable for your back. So I designed this piano to have the strings going up from the keys, and it means I can basically be lazy. I sit on my piano stool and I can make all the amazing sounds that I want to, and they're within easy reach. But I also think for the audience it's nice because you get to see what's happening. So that's the kind of musical palette, and we might do some examples, but just to give you like a quick sort of hit of the range of stuff, if I pluck a bass string, you get this amazing amount of resonance, but you can also scrape. I've stuck some bolts in a la John Cage. And there's lots of things I can do with two hands, which is harder to do whilst holding a mic. But things like the sound, the actual resonance of the body itself is kind of really amazing. So I use that whole surface to illustrate the story. And 12 years is 12 movements. And it's basically a kind of journey through hearing the IPCC deadline, which was given to us in 2018, which said we have 12 years to halve global emissions to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees. And probably like millions of other people, I read the headline and it didn't take me long to think that sounds quite shocking. That sounds like a short amount of time. And so the recital sort of starts there, it starts with this kind of 12 years, like, really? That seems quite short. And then it goes into some of the headlines. And all the time I'm kind of playing different piano textures under these tracks. And then we go into the kind of more eco-aware space. So we're kind of, what can we do, as individuals to help it? And then we start to hear from these fictional characters who are on the phone. I think we might talk about them a bit more later. And the idea was to give you like the sort of rounded perspective of how might it feel for us to get this news, but also what are people saying about it, and who's doing what, and what do you notice when you're just chatting to people in the street? Are they sort of doing the same as you, doing more, doing less? So it's a kind of, I'm trying to get into the like human response to the news. So rather than just be factual, I'm trying to get into the story behind how we all feel about it. And it's essentially then the journey carries on. We end up kind of visiting, like, well, being thrown into a wildfire, which is the sort of dramatic heart of the piece. And then we spend some time imagining how a glacier melting sounds. And I've just done actually a podcast, which is just out today, with a glaciologist, Liz Bagshaw. And it was really lovely to speak to her about glaciers and like the sound and the color of them. So that's on The Musical Activist, if anyone wants to have a listen to that. And towards the end, the characters kind of come to some sort of reckoning. But there's still, I mean, I think for me, the favorite lines are the sort of, but I haven't got the brain space for climate change, things like that. Because it's just, frankly, like people are busy and trying to keep up with life anyway. And what is this thing that is so remote and so abstract? And yes, okay, we know it exists, but like, what does that actually mean? And what are we actually doing? And what can we do? And, there's quite a lot of questions that come about from even just being really aware. And then right towards the end, we hear from Greta. And it was really interesting to me coming back, actually, sort of post-lockdown, because I think that we had got quite used to Greta and we were quite kind of, we sort of knew like what she was going to say. But actually coming back to her, she feels even more vital and more urgent to me. And also in the Greta chat, what you notice is that she really changes. So even just over the sort of 2 years, and I got, her permission to use her speeches. At the beginning, she's quite calm, and then she kind of gets increasingly more agitated. And by the end, she's kind of saying, "How dare you?" to the UN. And that just still feels immensely powerful to me. And I think more so actually after the lockdown. And then at the end, it's like, okay, where are we going to go with this? What are we going to do? What do I want to send you out with? And basically, I try to radiate as much positive energy from the piano as possible to kind of follow like Greta's thinking, there's no point sitting around hoping, action leads to hope. So anyway, there's quite a lot to unpick for you.
That is a lot to unpick, but it's really great insight. And what you just said about Greta, actually, I thought myself listening to those extracts, it's so easy to just see things as news and then they just come and go. And when Greta was hitting the news and then she just went, and for a lot of people she didn't, and like the Youth for Climate movement and so on, a lot of that still resonates and still there today. But for many of us, including myself, and I consider myself fairly sort of conscious of these issues, I sort of forget that voice, and hearing that voice again, having heard it obviously when she was giving those speeches, and hearing that voice again with the music under it, it really brings that home that actually that's the essence of it, and we can't quite forget that essence, that we've got to act, and it is pretty dire, and it needs to happen soon, like now. So that was really interesting how, and the same thing with the wildfires, actually, because again, that seems like a news item that's very specific to a particular place and time, and yet we've seen it's not, because wildfires keep happening again and again and again, and record Australian fires in Australia last year, record fires in California, nearly twice the size of the land that was burned 2 years ago, which was a record land burned to the ground 2 years ago itself. Yeah. So it's not really news, is it? This is the reality of it.
Yeah, I really noticed that because coming back to a piece every sort of, so I started it in November 2018, and then I kind of did some early premieres March 2019, and so even then the story between like what, for example, Extinction Rebellion was doing, because the sort of hidden sister who's on the other end of the phone that you don't hear much from, she's like, I've imagined her as a protester, but even just that journey was really interesting, because then straight after I did the show, then the April, they kind of burst out with the pink boat in Oxford Circus, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then obviously Greta, as you say, like sparked the world movement. But when I was first thinking about her, she was like the little girl sitting on the steps of the Parliament. So yeah, it was quite interesting. But the main thing I was going to say was about the wildfires, because what I realized in coming back to it and in this sort of cyclical way. And then again, March 2020, and then September 2020. Like actually, what the news itself wasn't changing, but what was changing was just the locations. So exactly like you say. So I'd added in a line about koalas in for March this year. It's like, oh, you've been off saving koalas, you know, because of the devastation of Kangaroo Island. But then I was thinking, oh no, but my wildfire track's in California and everyone's thinking about Australia now. But then, of course, the horrendous thing is you come to October 2020 and like, here we go again in California. And as you say, like 4 million hectares, was it?
It's
something
an area the size of Wales or something. It's something completely
just astonishing.
absurd.
Yeah. So it's the names and the names of the storms change, but the storms themselves are just keep coming. Yeah. So.
And is it something, just out of curiosity, so you mentioned, of course, the IPCC report, which did hit the headlines and was very shocking, that it was such a clear message with a deadline.
Yeah.
Which before it had never really, previous reports were like, we need to act sometime soon, we need to start changing, whereas this was like, this is the number, 50%, and this is to give us a 65% chance of limiting below 1.5 degrees, and it has to happen within 12 years, but 10 now, actually.
Right.
Because we've sort of wasted those 2 years. And I wonder, prior to that sort of moment or series of moments where you started thinking, I've got to respond to that somehow, how engaged were you with this topic of the climate emergency or climate change?
Yeah, I mean, so, I think of myself as a pretty environmentally aware person, and I've always tried to think about the impact that I'm having. But really, actually, the wake up year for me was 2018. It was a kind of strange concurrence. Basically, I worked for a local arts charity in Brighton, environmental arts. It's called Onca. And during the year, because I was kind of working for them and I was reading more essentially and writing more about the environment, it just sort of seemed like everything I read was more alarming than the last thing. And it was this sort of crescendo of alarm, I think. And then in the summer of that year, I read about the luxury bunkers. I think it was August, perhaps. And this is the Survival Condo, which is kind of like this thing that started the whole creative idea in my head. I actually started writing a novel, and I've written 10,000 words. So if anyone out there is interested in that, let me know, because I need some motivation to carry on with it. But so it was really all came from these characters who I was imagining like we're going to buy the bunker. And there's just so many questions raised by that, as a sort of way to survive, to lock yourself underground. And they're like amazing. I mean, you can live in them for up to 10 years and you can have whole communities in them, and they like grow food and have fish and, but like so completely disturbing as an idea. And yeah, anyway, so it was really 2018 that kind of I woke up. And then by the time the headline came out, I was just like, right, I've got to do something else. I need to do something more. And it was very much like, right, well, I get paid to do piano recitals, so I better just do piano recitals about climate change. And it was kind of that simple and that crude in a way. And Kieran in the Galway Jazz Festival, bless him, when I went over there in March, I thought, I went there and we took my piano, drove over. And I got there and I thought, do you mind that I've done a recital about climate change? Because we haven't really talked about this, and like you just wanted to see my piano, because as a performer and a programmer, you just there's a sort of understanding of what might a show be. Fortunately, he turned out to be the most amazingly environmentally aware person and had spent money making his house a passive house. So fortunately he was like, yeah, this is totally important. It's brilliant that you're doing it. But yeah, thank goodness, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also something that the more we talk to people, we realize actually we're not alone in thinking that something needs to be done. It's just we don't always know how to do things individually. But I wonder, did it feel, making that sort of shift, did it feel scary at all? Or how did that feel in terms of the career you had built up to that point? Did it feel like a natural next step? Did it feel like
It was a definite problem to solve. It was like a compositional text problem to solve. So one thing that I always do, and like big shout out now to the funders that keep us all going, so Arts Council England and PRS Foundation. And with Arts Council, what I've always done is try to get a team of mentors around me so that I'm guided by their expertise, because in all of this I'm so aware that like I'm absolutely not the expert in the climate and ecological emergency. I just try to be as informed as possible. So I had an amazing environmental campaigner, Atlanta Cook. I had a film writer and director, Nick Mills, and I had a Met Office climate scientist, Inika Taylor. And it was just great because I had this team of people who could guide me, either knowing about the stuff, how to talk about the stuff, or how to write about, like how to write text in a good way, and, character development, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. You mentioned Extinction Rebellion earlier, and I know that for a lot of people, that sort of discourse can be seen as very political. So if you mention the climate at a dinner table, people might say, "Oh, let's not be political." Do you see yourself as a political artist, or do you see this work as political?
I mean, it makes me smile when people say, "Let's not be political," because it's like, what is politics actually? When you unpack what politics is, all it's meant to be is people organizing themselves into groups and finding somebody to represent them that most represents most of the people. Like, actually, all politics is us, but in a sort of condensed form. And so to shy away from being political just seems like madness to me, because it just means that you're not worried about who's representing you, which is just wrong. Of course we want to be represented by the people that we agree with. So I mean, any sense of shying away from politics is crazy, but obviously what we've got into is a situation where the party politics completely takes over and then divides people. And recently there's been lots of research, hasn't there, about, well, not research, but like the documentary that came out about social media dividing us all even further, and we all get just really shouty and ranty and go into our little silos. And that is that's the problem, not the politics itself, because politics, I think, is just a way of organizing who's got the power and who figures out who spends the money and what you spend it on. And policy is what we need. Actually, we're all making ourselves very guilty in trying to be as environmentally as aware as possible. I'm currently feeling guilty about not having made the step to being vegan, which the character in the show is, and her sister's like, "Vegan? What am I going to cook for you?" Which is like totally normal response. And we're each of us have like some sort of challenge that we can't quite take on, or can't face, or don't want to face, or whatever it is. So yeah, sorry, I've slightly lost my thread, but anyway.
That's all right. It's really, yeah, really great to hear. And so in terms of how much do you think?
Oh, you were asking about Extinction Rebellion?
I was asking about political,
politics, yeah.
but I'm wondering whether how much do you think this interest in the climate emergency, or feeling that you've got to respond to that in some way in your creative work, do you think that's now sort of there to stay?
Let me just go back, because my thread that I can now pick up, is just about actually not spending all your time in the kind of individual behavior change space, not being worried about that exclusively, but actually also remembering that it's the big change that's going to happen, that's going to make the change that we need. So in other words, it's like systemic change. It's like stopping fossil fuels. It's how is power coming to the country, what materials are being imported, what's the movement of stuff, what is the total of the impact of travel. So I think actually it's both. And there's been like kind of arguments about this on Twitter between climate scientists, which way should we go? And it's like, well, actually we just, I mean, my feeling is we need all of it all the time, as soon as you can, but politics is about that power to group and to put pressure on to make change. And I mean, Extinction Rebellion did make basically the government declare a climate emergency, which if it's not followed up by action, at least is a statement that we can point to. But anyway, yeah, I won't get any more political than that. But you just asked another question.
I did, but maybe I'll repeat it in a second. I just wanted what you just said. So your work in a way. So the one thing is, of course, individual action, and then the systemic action. And it was fairly obvious, I think, from what we saw during coronavirus, how individual action was essentially maximized. People were not traveling, people were not flying, people were not consuming, they were not doing all of the things that we keep saying you've got to stop doing for the climate. And yet the dip was barely noticeable. And in fact, we're now back to where we were. So in a way, that's a very clear example of how there's only so much in a way that can be achieved by individual change. And there's other things that keep destroying the planet, which are not down to individuals.
Yeah,
and we need to collectively sort of advocate for.
I think it's yes and no in that case, actually, because I think, yes, it was really depressing how small the dip was. And when we were speaking to Ed Hawkins and he was like, yeah, it's going to be about 4%, we were like, really? We changed this much and that's all that happens? But then actually, when you think about it, Amazon's profits went up by 30% or something. So actually everyone was just sitting at home buying stuff online instead of going to the shop. And like, think of the general environmental impact of that. And also we were all at home and people, I mean, okay, the weather was really nice for some parts, but we were all at home using the power and using video streaming, and like, we need to think about data banks. And so, I suppose as an optimist, you can't sit on your laurels, because actually if you stop doing things, then that's when the sort of enormity and badness of it hits you. So I think, but we do need to balance that with not guilting each other out.
And obviously with your work, it sort of does a bit of both, because the work itself is it just raises awareness for people who might like your work but are not climate oriented or think about the climate. They might think, oh, that's interesting, I'll have a listen. And it sort of legitimizes that discourse, legitimizes talking about it, making music about it, and thinking about it. And at another level, though, I saw on your website you had a sort of media pack available to download to people who view the performance. I'm not sure if that was on the Sound UK website, and it had references to the articles that you use and the extracts that you use in the piece, which I think is very strong, because it's saying this is real. It not just responds to, but actually contains bits of the real world. Like the really harrowing the audio footage from the car driving through the wildfires, which I watched the video, and actually having the sound without the video is even more harrowing, because you really get those voices in your head. With a video, you can sort of scroll past in a way.
Yeah, that's
you can't scroll past the music. So I found that really, really powerful. But on the second page, you get a list of all sorts of suggestions and actions that people can take away with them. So you're not just stopping that engagement at the play button, but what you're saying is, you've come all the way here, you might be feeling hopeless or helpless or whatever, but here's a couple of starting points. Things you could do today, like switching to a renewable energy supplier. Right. You could do that in about 15 minutes online. You don't have to lift a finger. Everything happens automatically, but it actually has quite a decent impact. So do you feel there is, and this is maybe a bit of a loaded question, but do you feel there is a moral responsibility for artists today to engage with that topic and be part of that change?
Well, I mean, I think that artists should make work about whatever they want to make work about. And of course, they could also make work that isn't about anything, that is art for its own exploration. So I don't think it's for me to tell other artists that they should all be making music about climate change now. But I think for me, it was an imperative, actually. The fact is that the IPCC did give us this countdown, and the year that they're counting down to is the year that my son will turn 18. And so as a parent, I think I feel the moral responsibility more than as a musician. But as a musician, I've got the opportunity and the platform to maybe chat to some other people about it as well. And Catherine Hayhoe, this amazing climate scientist who, if you are on Twitter, definitely follow her. She's brilliant. She says, like, the best thing we can do is talk about it, because it's just raising awareness and sharing and going on the journey together. And also that's what a musical show does, isn't it? It takes us on a journey together. And I suppose ultimately what I hope is that the music gives you time, because the fact is we're so fast, aren't we, in the amount of information we receive, and we look at our phone and we see a headline and we're like, oh, but then we have to go and do something else. So just taking an hour of your life and being with something might enable you to just digest the situation more. So
yeah, really nicely said, beautifully said. I would be interested to hear a bit more about those fictional characters. I think they're a really interesting part of it, because the work is not documentary, but also is not fiction entirely. It sort of sits uncomfortably, or maybe comfortably, somewhere between the two.
I like uncomfortably. I like that. Yeah, that's
uncomfortably
good.
because in a way, the whole thing that V for Vendetta says, that artists use lies to tell the truth, whereas politicians use lies to cover the truth. And in a way, using fiction in that way brings up really, like, I found some of the stuff that was being said on the phone. I was like, I have heard that person talk in my life. I know who that is.
Yeah.
So they're fictional, but they're very close to the bone in a way, to some very real interactions people might have had, or I imagine maybe you have had.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, we're all chatting to people all the time. And I mean, even the dynamic of a family is interesting, isn't it? Because we're related, but we might think totally different things. And just people that you meet in your daily life, that you work with, that you do the school run with, that's a massive area where as a parent you're suddenly like meeting all these people that you wouldn't have met through work or any other way. So yeah, it's conversation, and I like the ranginess and the sort of looseness and the way that they're able to jump right into the biggest, deepest topics, but they're also like able to be funny, but also they bristle or they sort of tease each other, or there's like a sort of useful poking that goes on, I think, with the conversation. And as much as anything, I was asking myself, right, so if I feel this about a particular topic, let's talk about flying. So flying is a massive part of your individual footprint, but everyone is about to go flying away on their holidays. So what happens when you ask a person what they're doing on their holidays, and how does the conversation start? I would really, really recommend everyone go to Climate Outreach website, because it's really nice, just comedy videos about how to chat about things. One of my friends said it really nicely, that empathy has to be the start of any kind of change, and so coming alongside a person and going with them one step, which just seemed like a nice way. So yeah, they are totally fictional, but they are also absolutely, I mean, they've become real people in my head, but they're not real.
Yeah, they certainly feel very real, and although we know it's fictional, it adds a really beautiful, sort of interesting relationship there.
Thank you.
Can identify with some of that, but knowing that it's not really there.
Yeah, and the thing about the one-sided phone call, because you're mainly hearing Fran, and Lara's on the other end, and she's the one on the other end is the protester. So you're not really hearing her, but you're kind of imagining what she's saying. And the idea is to kind of activate you as a listener, so that you start to think, okay, so we've got her over here, we've got this person over there. We don't know who that is yet. But I mean, that I feel that, but no, come on, I don't feel that thing. And what she said then. So you're meant to be kind of placing yourself, I suppose, on the spectrum somewhere, because it suddenly reminded me the other day about Michel Thomas. I don't know if you know him. He's like a language coach, and about 20 years ago I bought his CDs to learn Spanish, and he has a really great, so you're listening and he's teaching, and he's got two pupils with him. One of them is really brilliant, like totally amazing, and you're trying to keep up with them, and the other one is a little bit slow at learning, and you're kind of you're waiting for them to do it, and so you find yourself kind of saying to them what the answer is. And it's just really clever, because it pitches you in this space of kind of aspiration and helping. And maybe we can all be in that space of aspiration and helping.
That's really, really interesting. I yeah, I've been learning languages through audiobooks, and I'm just really always surprised at the different methods people use. But that sounds like a really, really engaging way
Yeah,
of taking people on board. Yeah, and I guess because part of the whole discourse is also people not wanting to be told what to do.
totally. I hate being told what to do.
Yeah, but at the same time, they also don't know where to start, even if they know, even though they might want to. So it's that how do you? I think that it's a really interesting one. How placing them in that spectrum actually might help them see where they might want to go towards, but also help others get on the journey with things they
Right.
are aware that others might not be. It's really, really
Exactly.
interesting.
Because somebody said to me that you've got your sort of hardcore activist over here, and then you've got your, person who doesn't want to think about it at all. And that person is never going to change that person. But this person might chat to this person who might chat to this person who, and so you get this like chain of communication and understanding, actually we all do and need to understand each other better. So
Yeah, and in a way, making works of art that overlap with this sort of discourse maybe helps trickle down into some more of those interactions happening.
I hope so. I mean, my mum had to start talking about climate change with her neighbours because they were like, what's Sarah's latest show? And she's like, and it's a piano recital about climate change, And I'm pretty sure that's the first time she said that, like on the street to her neighbour. And I mean, the other thing I really like is that it gets to go on Radio 3 or gramophone or classical piano, these places where people aren't talking about it. And yeah, so pushing the conversation into different places is useful, I think, as well.
Yeah,
and for
absolutely.
each of us to bring like our professional skills and passion into the conversation, because we have to move as a society. We're not just moving as a political decision. Like it will impact on all of us. So
yeah, absolutely. This is all really, really interesting. We should wrap up very soon, but I'd be really interested to hear that the last piece of the 12 is called "I Find It Hard to Be Hopeful," but and I was wondering, do you still find it hard to be hopeful, and what gives you hope?
So I did refer earlier about being an optimist. I mean, I just am an optimist. I suppose because I can't compute the bad outcome, because the bad outcome is so bad. It's sort of like, instant extinction fundamentally. Like, could my child have a child safely? That's the sort of ultimate question. And so I suppose to counteract that, I just throw myself into trying to be active and trying to, talk about the subject. That track itself is sort of a microcosm of the whole journey, to be honest, because on the day I was feeling really, really weighed down by the reality and the news and the scientific information. And I basically went for a walk and I was like, oh, I can't face the piano. And I came back to the piano, and literally it starts with this kind of stuttering opening. It's just and I was just like searching, the open fifth. It just leaves you an open space in which to exist. And then it's kind of, and I use one of the rubber balls to bounce off the string. And I'm just literally trying to explore resonance and what's the framework, what's the musical place that I can be in. And actually gradually through the piece, I was like, come on, Sarah, pull it together. Stop all this, don't sit around going, oh, just get stuck in. And so gradually the piece gets more and more momentum. And then by the end of it, I'm literally playing this like F major chord, and I'm repeating and repeating. And I do honestly sort of say a quick like non-religious prayer in my head as I'm playing that, to like throw out, come on everyone, let's sort this out. The fact is we can. Scientifically it's fairly straightforward. Like in terms of the actual policies, it's like dramatic things need to happen, but we know what they are and they are possible. So that's what my F major chord is hoping for.
That's great. Very beautiful. And of course, anyone who tunes into any of the 12 streams will have a chance to hear that entire journey, from the shock of the 12 years, the sort of bell toll, down to the hopeful F major, and that positivity emanating out of the inside out piano.
Yeah.
That's really great. As a sort of send this maybe send us off, I was wondering if you have any inspirations in the music world or outside the music world. You mentioned earlier that you had a lot of mentoring support that you used some of the funding for in preparing for this piece. So I'm wondering whether before or during that process, who are your inspirations when it comes to making music that resonates or responds to the climate emergency?
I mean, I'm quite bad at musical references, and it's one of the greatest disappointments of my husband. He says that I hardly listen to music, which is such a bad thing to admit. But, the fact is, I think when I'm at my piano, actually the piano is the inspiration, because I'm just an explorer, so much like Liz Bagshaw out on her glaciers, and she's observing. I'm sort of the same with my piano. I'm like exploring the terrain. I'm finding what the terrain says to me. And, like with that illustration of the open fifths. So making instruments is extraordinarily inspiring, because they surprise you and they reveal themselves to you. And there's a kind of, it's a bit like being a parent in that you're discovering this thing that you've made. And so I think the piano actually is my sort of main musical inspiration. And on the other hand, it's really just the climate scientists that I try and learn as much from as possible, because they are the ones that know, and they are the ones that will guide us, and people that are telling us about the ecology and all of that. So with the tour, you can come to a post-show Zoom with some of the UK's like really top climate scientists, and I would urge everyone to look at those dates and see if they can join one of those Zooms, because they're really brilliant and amazingly knowledgeable people.
That's amazing. Thanks very much, Sarah. And all I have to say is that if anything, I just hope people experiencing this piece will go away being as inspired to examine the world around them in the same sort of curiosity that you approach the piano, and maybe start looking at whether the natural world or anything, the relationships that they have in the world, and how maybe climate doesn't fit in there or does fit, because it is that we have to be aware of things and to care to sort of like them and to love them and to get to know them, to then be able to care for them and to care to protect them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, and absolutely walking in amongst trees is like another place where I find my brain is much, much healthier. So yeah, definitely taking inspiration from the things that grow around us.
Yeah, beautiful. So thank you very much, Sarah. You can go to sounduk.net to find out more about the upcoming tour. It's basically Thursday to Sunday or Wednesday to Saturday over the next 3 weeks, every night at 7:30 p.m. And there's, I think, 5 of those have got a live discussion following the Zoom, the live stream performance. You can find out more about upcoming new music events on the Sampler, thesampler.org, and of course we're from soundandmusic.org, the UK's new music charity and organisation. We're actually going to be launching an open call later this week to ask for artists to pitch ideas for new works that respond to the climate emergency. So hopefully that will stimulate some more of that discourse, and we're looking forward to receiving any applications for any musician that they're interested in having an opportunity to create something in this thread, if you've been listening to this and being inspired by Sarah's work.
That's great to hear that. And if anyone wants to chat about my piece online, then do use the hashtag 12yearspiano.
Great, amazing. Thanks very much, Sarah. Really, really enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me.
Wish you all the best with the concerts, and I really look forward to tuning in, probably on more than one occasion.
Thank you.